Okay, excellent. Could you introduce yourself and how you got involved with Chisenhale Dance Space?
Hi, Rachel. I'm Mary, Prestidge. I was a part of the X6 Dance Collective. We were based in Butler's Wharf during the late 70s. And when the development of the wharf took place and we all had to move, X6 moved across to Tower Hamlet and to Chisenhale. And we'd also kind of worked out that to develop our own work and to build a kind of philosophy and way of working that we wanted to bring to ourselves and to others, we needed to be in a building and a space that had access in and out and as part of a community. At Butler's Wharf, we were very cut off and quite remote. So it was only hardcore, interested, very committed people to a very specific area of work that would come into Butler's Wharf. So I was a part of X6 for those years and then was very eager to come into this bigger setting with more people and to develop an interesting context, really, and something that would work for us and with others.
When you moved to Chisenhale in the 80s, there was a period at the beginning where the building itself required lots of attention and renovation, which the collective did. But once it was open, what was it that you were doing at Chisenhale?
We had a lot of meetings, developing policy and ideas and priorities and stuff. I remember, I think the floor was built in 83, which, transformed the space and allowed us to work in there. So I think we must have been running and doing very ad hoc and under the radar events. Yes, reading through the Tower Hamlets Community Dance Report, I'd forgotten that we didn't have plumbing up there for quite a few years from the beginning. So those first few years, they were very full. We were doing a lot of maintenance, to the windows and trying to raise funds. It became a huge task to get the funding to have the fire escape in order to be legal to then be able to get more funding to run a programme. So I didn't realise it was so long, actually, that we were there before our programme started. We must have been running some sort of small independent sessions. I remember we had Michael Clarke's film that he made with Charles Atlas was made in the space, and that I think was quite early on before the seating was in. Chris and I started the community dance programme, which was an opportunity that we'd built relationship with Tower Hamlets, obviously, and we were getting some support financially from the council, but also working with the arts department there, the arts team there, which was Peter Conway and Sally Williams. And they were running an East End arts festival. And so we were trying to bring in Chisenhale as a potential venue, particularly to raise dance at Chisenhale and in the eyes of Tower Hamlets. And that was managed to do. So because we couldn't use the upstairs of Chisenhale because of the lack of fire escape, we opened up the ground floor space on the Art Place Trust side. So we had laid the floor down there and we ran a fantastic programme downstairs. So yes, we did actually a lot before the fire escape because we were doing some work. Myself and Chris were already out doing a lot of connection and connecting in the borough. And we ran the first summer school was in Chisenhale, shared in Chisenhale in one of the local schools as well. So I remember we did bring, and it was described in the report, we brought in a group of young people, wheelchair users, and we carried each and every one up. Oh no, that was the fire escape. Yes, that was the fire escape. It was there, but we didn't have any other access other than the stairs.
I think at that point, the fire escape had only just been finished because I remember reading about the East End Festival you described. And that was 1984, where the fire escape wasn't there. And then by 1985, it must have been ready. And at that point, you could get people into the space.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you and Chris Cheek were awarded these formal roles, which are described as a community dance worker. And you've kind of touched on broadly what you were doing in that role. But could you talk a bit more about that work that you were doing as a community dance worker in Tower Hamlets?
Yes, for sure. It was a part of a nationwide scheme to bring in these roles, these animateur roles that we thought not appropriate But it was, in a way, that's what it was, which was about animating, coming into a particular area, whether urban area or rural area, and to inspire dance, to bring dance, to see how it can really enliven a space, to bring people together, to help support spaces that need more resources and need some engagement, and finding appropriate connections for people to support whatever is going on in that region. So we weren't there as peripatetic teachers as such. We spent that first year really seeking out sort of across a range of community groups and individuals and organisations, buildings, sports centres, art centres, in schools, and small independent, the Fab Club, small youth clubs and arts organisations. So it was about going and introducing ourselves, probing a little bit, and sort of trying to highlight dance in a particular way, trying to see what we could do. And we often went in and did some initial sessions, opening up possibilities for people, and then maybe trying to find more support for them in different ways. So it was a lot of those meetings initially. And then we decided to take on this 2-week annual youth dance summer school. Well, one was for children sort of under 12, 14, and another one for older young people from 15 to 25. And they were very focused, and we brought people in to support us in dance with music backgrounds, theatre backgrounds, cross-cultural as well. So those were really exciting events, actually, which were held. Actually, one half of the week would be we use Mulberry School, which is Tower Hamlets Secondary School in Stepney, and the other half would be in Chisenhale. I remember running a tea dances in York Hall, huge hall in Tower Hamlets. We tried to tap into what was already there and see what energy came out of those, and some were much more long lasting. We had a wonderful group from New York, the Magnificent Force, which were a hip hop breaking crew, which had actually sort of been galvanized and brought into a bit more of a performative context. So they were actually touring, sort of sharing their work under the umbrella of breakdance and hip hop, but with a kind of more performative contemporary dance focus. But they were fantastic, and they were coming into London, so they came and worked with us in different settings in Tower Hamlets, and that brought a great following. We did one in a sports centre, and we got a lot of young people into there, and that spawned some offshoots. We ran a lot of drumming and percussion sessions and dance sessions at Chisenhale as well, which came out of that. And then we crossed over. There was an arts team called the A Team who worked with young people, young girls primarily, in Tower Hamlets, led by 3 really strong visual arts practitioners who did fantastic work in Tower Hamlets. They'd been there before us, and they continued through the 90s. And so those connections sort of, stayed throughout, kept coming in and out, different collaborations throughout the time that I was there during the 80s and then beyond. And a project that I did with a visual artist from Chisenhale who had a studio there. She and I worked together on some duo live performance work, and then we evolved into a larger community-wide performance project which involved several groups throughout the borough, and we worked along the canal and in Victoria Park and ended in Chisenhale on a huge event in 1987. The A Team were a part of that, as were other groups. So I think it was a great opportunity, and privilege to have those resources to go out and meet what was there, which was one of the aims of what we wanted to do anyway, as Chisenhale coming from X6 and being on the ground much more. Yeah, we tried to animate and support people who were working in different settings. We had a strong relationship with Rana and Nargis, 2 Bengali artists who were living in the borough and were working at Mulberry School and peripatetically working around the borough. And they came teaching on the summer school. Their group of young women, young girls dancing came and participated quite a lot. and performed a part of our programmes in Chisenhale. Out of those first couple of years of summer schools, we set up a permanent youth classes and a youth group at Chisenhale, and a vast programme of different classes. We had a Lindy Hop class, we had drumming sessions, regular drumming sessions, we had children's classes. So those things were really instigated through the plodding around the borough that we did.
When I read the reports, the range of different dance forms that you were working with is really vast. You kind of mentioned a few there. The Bengali group with Raina and Nargis, then there was the London Youth Dance Theatre and the tea dances, the Irish folk dancing, and then there's the drumming and the percussion and the Caribbean and African dance as well that was facilitated through the community dance worker programme. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, because at that time in the 70s and 80s, obviously Tower Hamlets, like the rest of London as well, but particularly in Tower Hamlets, because there was a sort of prominent Bengali community that had moved to Tower Hamlets and were facing racism in the borough. What was it like trying to make contact with groups? Was that difficult? Were there challenges in doing that? There were lots of social tensions and in the area at that time. But then Tower Hamlets has a really vibrant history of music festivals, arts festivals, performance festivals. So, like you say, there were lots of things going on already that you could make contact with and make these networks. And so how did you go about reaching different community groups? And were people open to that as well in kind of working with you?
Yeah, there were some really strong people running these particular community and art centres. They were really, really committed. But I mean, they were very careful to hold and support wherever they were. And, we couldn't just walk in. It was kind of carefully managed how we did introduce ourselves. And we had to take different stunts in each situation. And I remember trying to negotiate some movement sessions, dance sessions in the Montefiore Centre for a lot of the Bengali children that were coming in on a Saturday or something, and sort of saying, okay, well, we can't call it dance, we should really give it another broad title so that people don't feel threatened, or it's just really not a part of what their children or their daughters should be doing. So we had to kind of find our language, find our ways. And I think our openness to, I think we weren't coming in with, I think that was to our advantage. We didn't have a particular style as such. We were looking to see what people could offer us and then work with their interests. That was seen to be Chris and my approach. We could offer some real basic things and actually be able to look at what people are doing and offer suggestions and try this, try that, and open some fitness and playfulness in our introductions. And I think that could work across the divides, if you like, or across the cultural spaces that we try to come into with different levels of success. I think one of the toughest places was going to the Island Art Centre on the Isle of Dogs, and it was in a deeply white-centred space for young people, and we were working with mostly young women, and the lads just couldn't cope with it from the outside looking in. They really, really fought us, almost physically, that what we were doing, coming into their terrain as, bringing in our dance or bringing in another way of looking at things. And they were very hostile. But the Island Art Centre was fantastic. I mean, the people who worked there, but I think we've got perceived in quite an anti-difficult light by some of the young lads there.
Yeah, that must have been really challenging. And like you were saying, the way that you were working meant that you could work with lots of people, but also you had space to offer. You had Chisenhale, as a space. And I know that you were kind of collaborating with other spaces in the borough, but I was reading in the Tower Hamlets Community Dance Report, you were describing, as part of the Chisenhale Steps Festival, the East London African Dance Company had performed it. It was really successful. You also described how in the borough, there weren't that many places that had the funding to be able to kind of support the local talent.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if they did, then they were kind of looking for more commercially viable acts rather than supporting what was, immediately around them. So did it feel at the time as though Chisenhale was kind of providing a platform, or could potentially provide space for people that wasn't necessarily elsewhere?
Absolutely, absolutely. But I also sort of just thinking through now, I know that a lot of us coming into X6 and coming into Chisenhale, we'd been through those sort of institutional spaces for showing the ballet, for example, which some of us come from modern dance and from those big established kind of places. We were kind of rolling ourselves back into some independent space where we were building up new platforms, programs where new work could happen. Yeah, we were absolutely wanted to present music and dance from across the bar. We had no hierarchical thing about what we brought together, and one was more than the other, where it had come from. It was what was in our neighborhood, what was burgeoning. And that was what it was. But I think the aspirations or expectations for obviously some small groups who wanted to perhaps make it in a bigger way and be more visible. To me, there's some kind of different journey. We met in the middle somewhere. One wanted to go up, we were wanting to dig down. That's what it felt like. And I do remember a conversation and Saxon Youth Club, which was an Afro-Caribbean, predominantly youth club setting. And we had Magnificent Force perform there, and we ran some sessions there. And I remember talking to one of the youth leaders about, the Royal Ballet and the aspirations to maybe why weren't we offering more these kinds of stepping stones or ways to sort of go up, the aspiration to be a part of that higher art context or that predominant form. And we're trying to explain otherwise, was difficult in a way. And we could appreciate that, but kind of saying, I mean, that was our slant. That was certainly where I was coming from. And that was the meeting point at X6 of where we were trying to unpick a lot of what we'd been through and try and find ways forward to work within the forms we had and wanted to explore, and also the context that we were in our own space that we could develop independently from those other institutions. Yeah, so it was a real critical moment, what people's aspirations were and what needed to be met, what needed to be supported. And I think I was probably quite indignant at the time, saying, oh no, you don't want to go there, you'll get your individuality taken away from you. But of course, look at the system it's coming out of, how to come into those systems in order to break them open, and that's really important too, really, really important.
The work that you're doing, it seemed to me to be quite political. And did it feel like that at the time for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, on all fronts, I think. I mean, I think it was embedded in what we were doing. We were the outsiders in the work that we were doing from the get-go, really. Just trying to break down different barriers in the smallest sort of ways, really, but on all fronts, and thinking about, the disability movement and giving access and opportunities and scope that we felt was possible in the actual movement practice we were doing, but also in the structures that we were trying to evolve to support that. I certainly think that all the new improvisation work, content improvisation, was all absolutely political from the get-go, from the body outwards. And sometimes I took that sort of for granted. It was very challenging to people outside, to view that as dance or, we'd bring content improvisation into a sports context so that, you could see the vitality and the communication and the compatibility and the supportiveness, but also the physicality of a form like content improvisation, and seeing it in that light and within that context could really help people to appreciate and maybe question stuff. And I remember some of the girls doing their dance routines and, they'd be very obvious showy dance stuff with all the moves, with the music, and then we say, well, what else do you and then we do these sort of acrobatic sessions, rolling and cartwheeling and pulling and pushing and jumping over each other. And so suddenly don't you like doing some of these? So suddenly there'd be a whirlwind of spinning and cartwheeling in the middle of their dance routine. So it was sort of just opening up, the possibilities, and a little bit contact, back to back, good bit of wrestling. I think working with people like Anna and, outside of the dance idiom would really enable that. I did things with Sarah Green, who was a visual artist, but she'd also been a gymnast like I'd been. So we would interrogate those past stories that we had and bring them into focus now about bodies and about ourselves. And with Carol Devaughn, she was a poet, but interested in Tai Chi and movement on that side of things, and so we collaborated as well. So my pathway was in collaboration a lot in terms of my performance work. I did tend to work with other people, or either to do duet pieces or to create a bigger program, which is what happened with Passing Through, where I worked with Fran Cattell and Jan Hauer, who were coming from visual arts and music side of things, and did this big scale project, integrating, again, many of the groups that we'd worked with in our community dance times, and it still was.
Well, it seems as though you were given this formal title of the community dance worker, but it seems as though basically what was underpinning all of your work was the work that you were doing there, and then the work that you were doing as an artist were the same. Did you think of those aspects of your work as different, or were they very much of the same work really for you?
I think the two were enmeshed, actually. It was very all-consuming doing that, but I did feel that we were based at Chisenhale and we were part of all the programming and discursive stuff that went on around the development of Chisenhale's program and everything. So things came my way that I then got involved in and maybe shared some work with. But I felt that the creative side, I think that period at Chisenhale and with community dance was less about creating work that I was inspired to do. It just came out of what was happening. I never saw myself as a choreographer, particularly, or as a maker. I mean, that wasn't my thing. Didn't have that as the bigger picture. So I really enjoyed performing and participating in other people's events and things, and creating for things to happen. So that was my interest in terms of personal development, and I carried that through, although I'd done more focused things of my own in the periods after that time, and after having had my son as well. It was a different change, different focus, and then I was outside of London as well. Did some work with Jackie and with Chris Cheek. We shared a night and did stuff with Sue McLennan. Yeah, wonderful things, which I really enjoyed. But they were sort of in the moment constructions. That was the joy of having that openness to improvisation and making work and having a safe place to share it as well. But fruitful and long-term relationships as well, collaboratively.
Yeah, that seems to really come through in the work that I've done, that actually the work that was going on then and those relationships that were formed are ongoing, which is amazing. Before I ask you my last question, I wondered if there was anything else that was important to you that you wanted to talk about from that period.
I always talk about, now I reach back to the way of programming that we tried to do at Chisenhale as something that I don't think's really been replicated somehow, or that I feel was so important and actually had, it had longevity, I think, in the way in which we were looking at programming and how it arose. And I do remember that, Susie Gilmore, she'd really tapped into the sort of circuit, the comedy circuit that was just starting in London. That was where we were located. And then bringing the comedy and cabaret setting into Chisenhale. And that took a lot of organising to do and to make the space the right kind of vibe, how we transformed the space, how we used the fire exit entrance to bring people in. And we managed to get a small bar running on those nights. Again, they were eclectic. They had really diverse acts in there that weren't just, the straight comedy numbers, but we had small performance pieces by Yolanda Snaith and the Chumleys, or, a music event or poetry, or with all of that. And they brought in a completely different audience each time. So it was how we would program, and it was coming out of somebody's desire, what was happening, what seemed to be interesting, but rather than replicating lock, stock and barrel, what that was, we brought in our own breadth of interest into it. And the same with some different nights of bringing diverse dance forms under an umbrella, like the Steps Festival, where it's Irish, there was flamenco, there was Kathak or Bharatanatyam and belly dance, and certain things, you know, coming under the roof, and partnering dance. And I've kept that going on in my mind, what I've been doing in Liverpool sometimes, and in a way coming back to the aims of Chisenhale, that there were the 4 aims, you know, looking at performance for new work and performance cross-disciplinary, but having work with across cultural forms and in youth dance. And neither of those was one above the other. They could be seen or interact in different ways. And that's sort of what I've carried with me and felt. I was reminded of the other day about how people perhaps didn't take the work at some of the performance nights or the cha-cha-chas so seriously, because they kind of perceived Chisenhale as doing community dance. And suddenly, you know, this whole label of community dance being, oh, well, that's for community and that's not about the experiment. It's not about this, it's not about that. But actually, whatever that community is actually central. You know, it is about all of those things and can be about all of those things. And I think that's that sort of notion, that perception, and people place it there because people do suddenly say, okay, well, we'll do a community night, and therefore they actually log into that. It's about reshaping and re-bringing those in the programming of how you present. The context of things is what is so important. And I keep coming back to contexts about how you present, how you shape that program so that it can be seen for what it is, but actually what the potential it might have. The phrase stepping up, raising the bar comes up all the time. So it's also, it's about that, you know. Yes, there's stuff at different levels of development, but ambition might be the same, or some ways of integrity and intensity of what's happening, that whatever you're doing at whatever level, it has some integrity and an intensity of focus. And I think that's the sort of the movement work, the dance work, that, you know, we're not about kicking that leg as high as possible. There's something else going on, and that's what we have to kind of expose and open up and be able to look into and see. And so that's the politics, that's the whole politics in whatever quarter frame community you're in, you know, seeing what's there and sort of bringing it up.
Yeah. Because I have read in one of the reports that issue that you just described as, but particularly from the perspective of the funding bodies, as being classed as a community venue or classed as an arts venue or an experimental venue.
Yeah.
You know, that must have been a real challenge and also really exciting as well to have seen that and be part of it.
No, I think so. And I think we broke a lot of barriers down with that. You know, it was hard to categorize, I guess, but you know. And I can't believe, you know, reading stuff like Chisenhale was trying to do, well, did 60 performances a year. Good God.
I know the amount of stuff that was going on. Incredible. And on top of that, then classes, workshops, summer schools. Amazing. Lots. I think you've kind of answered my last question, really. But maybe if you had to summarise, and I guess this harks back a little bit to what we were just criticising about defining things, but if you had to describe what Chisenhale was at that period of time, how would you describe it?
Oh, blimey. Out of town. On the fringes of town. Nobody wanted to ever go to Mile End or Bow. God, just cutting edge, really, cutting edge and raw. It was pretty raw, and it was a strange kind of venue up a little residential street. It was kind of bizarre, you know. That old factory building with that Pompidou style fire escape going up the side, and we just think, what is this space? You know, come into it. Again, you know, it was its own thing. It was nothing like it, really. It was nothing like it. Nothing quite like it.
Amazing. Well, maybe that's a good way to end. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Well, thank you, Rachel.